Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amanda Phillips DeLucas, and I'm the director here at the Baltimore Neighborhood Indicators Alliance. I want to thank you all for joining us today for this State of the Neighborhoods address. For the past few years, we've been doing this briefing on vital signs as a lead-in to our annual Baltimore Day-to-Day event, which will be taking place tomorrow at the University of Baltimore. I hope you are all registered because we are very, very full for the event tomorrow. The interest in the event this year has really blown all of us away. But if you perhaps are someone who is not registered, who is really eager to come, please don't hesitate to send either me or anyone at BNIA an email, and we'll see what we can do that way. For the presentation today, what we are going to be doing is I'm going to give a brief introduction to BNIA, our organization, our indicators, and our geographies. Then I'm going to do a brief overview of our one new indicator for Vital Signs 2023, and then some high-level findings from the annual report. Following that, we will do a Q&A, but if there are questions that come up as you are listening, please don't hesitate to put them into the chat. And BNIA staff are waiting to answer any questions that can be kind of quickly answered, but I will do the more complex questions at the end. Okay, so first I want to introduce BNIA staff to everyone today. Our team has grown a bit, and so if you are new to BNIA or you are just sort of jumping in, I want to introduce you to everyone. So first, Cheryl Knott is our assistant director. She has been at BNIA for quite some time, and you've known her in many different roles in the organization. But she is essential to our vital signs report and realistically putting together the indicators that make up the report. Her work, as well as Logan's work, who is our research analyst, is what makes this report possible. I could not do it without them. We've also recently hired Zoe Rubenstein, who is our data acquisition project manager. She is supporting our work evaluating American Rescue Plan Act funds in collaboration with the Mayor's Office of Recovery Programs. And we also just recently, just a few weeks ago, brought in Warner Brockman as a research support specialist. He joined us as an intern last year and is now helping us on some projects in the organization. So if you see us around, feel free to say hi. And also, if you see us tomorrow at Day to Day, also say hi. We'd love to meet you. We were looking at the registration list for State of the Neighborhoods this year, and we noticed we have a lot of new people who have maybe never joined us for a presentation before. So I'm going to give a brief background to what we do and some of our work before jumping into the findings from our most recent vital signs report. So, what is BNIA? So, we consider ourselves a one-stop shop for comprehensive data training and indicators. So, we collect data from a variety of both public and administrative sources, and we look at that data across multiple topic areas, and we look at that data longitudinally. So every year we gather a bunch of data from a bunch of different sources, and then we update it in our vital signs repository, which is available on our website. So every year we do this big update. The most recent year is 2023. That is what we will be discussing later today. And our mission is to provide accessible, reliable, and actionable data and indicators about, for, and with Baltimore City and its communities. And we are not the only ones who do work like this. There are other organizations like us across the United States. We are a member of the National Neighborhood Indicators Partnership at the Urban Institute. And with that, there are over 30 cities who focus on data democratization, similar to us. And broadly, all of those groups look at and collect neighborhood indicators, although some of them are a little more topic focused, so they might be more focused in health, whereas we kind of take a broad holistic overview to the types and sorts of data that we analyze and look at. Now, I've been using this word indicator quite a bit over the past few minutes, and you might be asking, what is an indicator? In its most simplest form, indicators are a measure or a set of measures that help to quantify or express progress towards a goal or outcome. So the indicators that we create and that are a part of vital signs, each measure, or I like to say point to, a very particular phenomena that's happening in communities across Baltimore. So we'll go into what some of those look like, but essentially they are measures that can tell us something a little bit about what might be going on in neighborhoods. I also include a sort of more academic definition here because I just like it. But indicators are knowledge technologies that can be used to quantify, compare, and rank virtually any complex field of human affairs. And I like this definition just a little bit more than the other one because it's very action oriented. They're a technology that we, our organization, create, and thus we have responsibility to make sure that they're used appropriately. So I just kind of like having that action definition in the background too. So what can indicators do? We like to say that indicators are individual statistics that, when combined, provide a picture to what's happening in a community. So, for instance, labor force participation shows who's working in a community and who's not working in a community and how that might be changing over time. Median household income looks at what are the incomes of folks who live in that community? Are there a lot of varied incomes, or are they sort of all in one bucket together? Homeownership is another one that we look at a lot. How many properties are owner occupied in an area, and what sort of trends are we seeing across people who own homes in that area, such as median sales price, how many days are on the market, that type of thing. We also look at indicators over time. So that can sort of point to what direction is a neighborhood going in. So for instance, are the number of green spaces increasing in a park in a particular neighborhood? Or are students graduating from high school? And it can show us those kind of lines of, are we seeing declines? Are we seeing rises? And what might that tell us about overall or other changes going on in a neighborhood? And finally, they're used for setting goals or tracking progress. And BNIA was really set up initially as an organization to help neighborhoods define goals through data. So, if you want to see the overall number of vacant properties in your community reduced to, let's say, zero, what type of steps would need to be taken over the years to make sure that that goal could be accomplished? So setting measurable thresholds that could then be tracked and benchmarked so that you knew that your community was reaching towards those goals. And we pull from a lot of different data sources to create our indicators. This is a word cloud, and this word cloud, the bigger the source is, the more frequently it is used in vital signs. So you'll notice the big ones are the census. We also use the ACS, or the American Community Survey, to calculate a lot of our indicators. We look at schools data for our entire education and youth chapter. Info USA is our business data, so looking at what sort of economic activity is going on in neighborhoods. And BPD, or the police department, is where we get crime data from. But you'll see we have a wide variety of different sources that we pull from. And what we're really known for here at BNIA is looking at these data within a community context. So we have a customized geography that we use. We call it a community statistical area, or a CSA, which is how we look at trends that are going on within a community. Uh, Community statistical areas are made from building blocks of census tracts. So they don't quite match neighborhood to neighborhood. It would be so hard to look at trends neighborhood to neighborhood because we have so many neighborhoods in Baltimore City, and some are really large and some are really small. So what the community statistical area does is it allows us to sort of look at a meso level, what type of trends might be going on in places that share common characteristics. So I always like to point to Greater Charles Village and Barclay here. If you live in the Able neighborhood, for instance, also where we are doing data on tap this evening, you might know that you live in the Able neighborhood. You might know that it has very distinct characteristics, like those beautiful painted lady houses. And you might know that you don't live in Charles Village. But I think you would also say, where I live shares some common characteristics of Charles Village. There's a good population of students from Hopkins. There's a commercial corridor in there. They sort of share characteristics with one another, and that's why we sort of look at this. Not quite as small as a neighborhood, but not quite as big as a city when we're using the community statistical area. So here's what we are all here for today, Vital Signs 23 and the sort of summary of the report. So as I mentioned earlier, this is data through 2023. Our data and indicator are lagging. This is primarily so that we can do one big release of all the data at one time. All the data have different release schedules, and this just kind of works for the flow of things. So just keep in mind all the data we're looking at today is from 2023. Obviously, we are in 2025 now, so there's a bit of a gap. And Vital Signs is kind of it's multiple things. It is both the report that we put out that is available on our website that you can click through and read, and I hope you do. But it is also our interactive website and tables that we update, our open data portal, and our maps. We also this year created a shared Google folder to upload maps, sort of standalone maps that you can pull from for presentations and use in your own work or as you're sort of looking at different happenings in the city. So that link to the folder is available through our open data portal, and I think we're also going to throw it in the chat, just if you're looking for some maps to have handy for whatever work you're doing. There are over 110 indicators within the Vital Signs report that we try our best to update year to year. Obviously, some of them don't always get updated, but we do our due diligence to make sure we update what we can. And they're organized across 8 topic areas. Those include census demographics, housing and community development, children and family health and well-being, crime and safety, workforce and economic development, arts and culture, education and youth, and sustainability. This work is done from support from some of our generous sponsors, including the Annie E. Casey Foundation and the T. Rowe Price Foundation. Um, A sort of technical note is that we have not been able to update the Children and Family Health and Wellbeing chapter for quite some time. There's just some data availability issues as it relates to that particular chapter. So if you are on our website and you are looking for that chapter, the data is going to be quite old at this point. I believe it dates back to 2019. So just a heads up if you're looking in that particular area. For all the other ones, most of the indicators are updated through 2023. So for the rest of the presentation right now, I'm going to be providing a high-level overview of some key themes that we saw in the Vital Signs report this year. Keep in mind that there are over 110 indicators, and I cannot discuss all of them today. So really, I'm keeping it at a high level, but if there are more specific questions you have, our inboxes are always open for questions that you might have about what's going on in Baltimore's neighborhoods. So this year, at the request of some community stakeholders, we brought back what is known as the Economic Diversity Index. You might know, if you are a longtime Vital Signs reader, that we have something called the Racial Diversity Index, which basically measures the chance of any 2 people in a given neighborhood being of a different race from one another. And some community partners reached out within the past year asking if we could bring back the Economic Diversity Index, which measures a similar phenomenon, specifically the chance of 2 households at random in a neighborhood of being a different income level. This is a measure that was original to Vital Signs 1, and we were happy to take a stab at recalculating it and bringing it back. This is a priority for some because economic diversity is a very important part of building housing diversity. And we have multiple strategies in the city going on right now to increase housing affordability for residents, but also to build more robustly diverse communities as those initiatives take place. Um, Now, this current map that you see in front of you is the dark green. Those are the areas with the most economic diversity. So those are areas that have the most households who are of a different income. And the ones that are of that lighter shade of green, those are those with the least amount of economic diversity. We are so fortunate to have interns this summer from Code in the Schools who are actually working with us to help us refine our methodology for this particular index. We're looking at sort of examining whether we want to look at different income thresholds with this, if there's a better way of kind of expressing or communicating this particular index. I don't have much to share on that now, but we are hoping to put up a blog post to share their work after their internship is done this summer. So I would say please be on the lookout for that. So, um, if there was one big theme that I would want to pull out from the Vital Signs report in 2023, it was divergent recoveries. Now, economists, and I am definitely not an economist by any regard, have liked to refer to the recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic as K-shaped. So some areas and industries have recovered and are at or above where they were at prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. And then other industries, such as travel or hospitality, just didn't bounce back at the same level. And what that's creating is basically two divergent economies. And for the people who live in an economy, which is all of us, two kind of divergent ways of interacting in the world. For some, post pandemic recovery has been really positive, and for others, folks, they've faced a lot of challenges. Um, Now, we're not going to be talking about a K-shaped recovery from the exact economic perspective that this particular chart does, but I do think it's a really useful metaphor to think through some of the data that we're seeing in Baltimore City, um, and particularly in three different areas. So the first one is in crime and safety. Um, Over the past week, we've seen really amazing headlines about the work that the city has done particularly at driving down the homicide rate. And 2023 marked the first year in nearly a decade that Baltimore City recorded fewer than 300 homicides in the calendar year. This progress is absolutely incredible, um, and should be celebrated from the rooftops, as I think the city is doing at this moment in time, in being as this has been able to be sustained and continued to be reduced through 2025. But as homicides fell, part one crime, which includes instances of violent crime such as homicide, rape, aggravated assault and robbery, or property crimes such as burglary, larceny, and auto theft, rose substantially. Um, and more particularly, during 2023, Part 1 crime surpassed pre-pandemic levels. So for the past few years, when we've been looking at crime data for 2020, 2021, 2022, we would say, look, there was a really big drop of crime in 2020 due to the pandemic. People were not outside. They were not outside and they were not committing crimes. And then in 2021, it rose slightly, but it was still kind of below that pre-pandemic threshold. And then similarly in 2022. Unfortunately, in 2023, Part 1 crime surpassed that pre-pandemic rate. So what was actually going on there? When we dive into the data, what we see is that auto theft, there was over a 200% increase in auto theft that drove that rise in Part 1 crime. Um, For folks who live in the city, this is not surprising. I think colloquially we might refer to it as the Kia Boys phenomenon. But more specifically, there was a easily exploited design flaw in Kia and Hyundai vehicles that led to this over 200% increase in auto theft in the city. Um, the city has also sued. Or filed a lawsuit against automakers for not resolving this particular design flaw. Um, so it's a systemic issue. It's a crime issue, yes, but it's being driven in one particular area, although we do see some other rises in crime in rape and robbery that happen in addition to this sort of overall auto theft. So again, this isn't quite K-shaped, but we do think it gets to one of the challenges we're seeing in the post-COVID recovery, which is that we're seeing really strong improvements in some areas, and yet things don't seem to be that great. And I think one of the sort of things that might be guiding that overall feeling, that overall just sense of something isn't right, are these kind of big gaps and divergences that are emerging in the data. Homicides are down, but man, are auto thefts on the rise. And we're just kind of living in that particular type of world. Another area where we are seeing these types of divergences is in labor force participation. So this is resides in our workforce and economic development chapter. So Baltimore City saw low unemployment in 2023, but the percentage of residents not in the labor force jumped to 37.6%. And this jump is significant because the rate had kind of floated around 30% for the past decade. And look, there are a lot of reasons that people might not participate in the labor force. Not all of them good, not all of them bad. But when there is that sort of rise after many years of consistency, we might want to dig in a little deeper and kind of figure out what's going on. Um, and as with many of our indicators across vital signs, this measure reveals really wide disparities. So, for instance, in West Baltimore, in Sandtown, Winchester, and Harlem Park, over 50% of the population is not in the labor force at all. This is also true in Old Town Middle East, in the East, and Morrill Park, Violettville on the city-county border. Um, Whereas conversely, there are some communities such as Highlandtown, South Baltimore, and Canton, those waterfront communities that have a very low percentage there. Only about 15% of folks are not in the labor force. But we also look not only at the indicators themselves, we try to look at change, and change can point us to maybe where some bigger things are happening. So between 2014 and 2018, and 2019, 2023, the percentage of the population not in the labor force in Morrill Park and Violettville increased by 24.3%. In Edmondson Village, it increased by 22.7%, in Clifton Berea by 19.7%, and Mount Washington Cold Spring by 18.8%. So we're seeing really large swings across time where those increases are really, really striking. And I would say if we were thinking about prioritizing a program or trying to figure out why those changes might be happening in a community, we would really want to look at the places where we're seeing these really large increases. Conversely, we're not seeing as big of decreases taking place, but there are some areas that have seen decreases in the percent of the population not in the labor force as well. Downtown Seton Hill is one of them, as is North Baltimore and Guilford. Um, we did dive in the vital signs report a bit into the age groups across neighborhoods and their labor force participation rates, sort of figuring that, oh, there might be some trends going on uh, based on sort of when you enter or leave the workforce. Um, and what we found there is that For entry-level workers age 20 to 24, workers just before retirement age 60 to 64, and middle to late career workers 45 to 54 actually saw large increases in labor force participation. So those are the kind of thresholds where people are entering the labor force in Baltimore's communities. But again, there are some neighborhoods where they saw big decreases, and where we saw big decreases in those kind of age range. So, for instance, in Oliver Johnson Square, workers between the age of 20 and 24 fell by 33.5 percent. Um, so there's definitely variation that's going on between age groups across our neighborhood. So if we're thinking about workforce interventions, or we're thinking about how to target particular populations for job programs, it might be worth digging into some of this age and participation data a little bit by neighborhood. And finally, another area where we're kind of seeing this K-shaped recovery is with our education and youth. So for the past few years since the pandemic, we've been hearing about chronic absentee rates. Chronic absenteeism was on the rise before the pandemic, but they skyrocketed during 2020 through 2021 and the 2021 through 2022 school years. Um, but on a positive note, data from Baltimore City Public Schools shows that rates are slowly decreasing. And I think that that's from the continued efforts of our city school officials and the teachers who work in those buildings. So absenteeism fell 4.5% among elementary students, 2.4% among middle schoolers, and 1.4% amongst high schoolers. Again, we're not below that pre-pandemic rate or even sort of the rises that took place before then, but the indicator is tipping the right way, and that was really positive to see. We also saw some neighborhoods that experienced really large declines. So, for instance, for elementary school students, Cross County Cheswold saw a decline of negative 16%, and Upton Druid Heights saw a decline of negative 14.2%. Similar for middle schoolers, Westport, Mount Winans, and Lakeland saw a large decline, as did the Waverlys. For high schoolers, those communities were South Baltimore and Dickeyville, Franklin Town. So really positive signs going on there. In terms of chronic absenteeism. But simultaneously, at the same time, we in 2023 we saw a rise in the dropout and withdrawal rate in city schools. So you'll see from this chart, which looks at school years from 2015 to 2023, the rate stays somewhat consistent around between that 3 and 4% with a slight dip during the 2019-2020 school year. And now we see a rise to over 5% in 2023. So again, small or big positive shifts, and then some more troubling shifts as they relate to the withdrawal or dropout rate. And I do want to end this note on a positive, on sort of a positive moment. I believe that there are signs in the vital signs data for 2023 that we are seeing unequivocal signs of recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. Um, in our housing and community development chapter, we are seeing communities that saw a sizable increase in homeowners receiving the homeowners tax credit. Between 2019 and 2023, the number of homeowners that received this credit increased in Upton Druid Heights by 63.8, Harbor East, Little Italy by 55.1 per 1,000 residents, and Dickeyville Franklin Town by 38.4. Um, This state program, the homeowner's tax credit, ensures that a tax bill does not exceed a percentage of a household's gross income. Homeowners must apply for this credit rather than receiving it automatically. Given this, there have been a number of groups in the city, including the SOS Fund and Maryland Volunteer Lawyer Services, who have been working really hard to get folks who qualify to be able to apply and receive this tax credit. And I think given the neighborhoods where we are seeing these increases take place, those efforts are working and it's moving the numbers. I think that we're really seeing some good change that way. Um, Another area of progress I think really relates to digital connectivity. During the pandemic, closing the digital divide really emerged across different stakeholders in Baltimore as a collective goal so that we could increase broadband and device access for not only youth, but all households across Baltimore City. Um, there's still a lot of work to be done as it relates to digital access and digital equity. But between 2018 and 2023, the percent of households without internet um, declined in um, declined substantially. So you'll see in this chart, Upton Druid Heights went from about a percentage of households without internet of about 35% to just over 10%. Oliver Johnson Square, just under 40 to just under 20. Midway Coldstream, just under 40% to under 10%, and Beachfield, 10 Hills, West Hills from about 25% to about 5%. These are really, really positive developments. But it's also worth noting that some of this progress may be fragile. There were a number of programs initiated following the COVID-19 pandemic to get aid to these communities. One of them was the Affordable Connectivity Program, which provided low-cost internet to households who qualified. That program has since been sunsetted. We're also just in general seeing a decline of federal funding. That might make it challenging to sustain some of these efforts. So I would say there are really positive signals in Baltimore City right now. We're seeing good things and progress being made in the data. But that progress is fragile, and it's upon us to sort of figure out ways to sustain the progress that programs have made over the past few years and figure out how we keep this momentum going. Another plug for Day to Day tomorrow. That's what we're going to be talking about and spending the whole day trying to explore. So I hope you'll join us on that. But um, I'm going to move to the questions portion of this particular presentation. Um, Feel free to put them in the chat. I don't know if anything came up while I was talking that I could address, but happy